Knotword, a Vera Ashcombe Story. Prologue. The First Binding. Dr. Vera Ashcombe was not merely a professor of folklore, she was a scholar who walked the boundary between story and spell. With a doctorate in cultural studies and a second specialisation in the history of European witchcraft, her research often veered into places most academics feared to tread: ritual landscapes, forbidden grimoires, and whispered histories buried beneath church floors and forest moss. To Vera, myth was never just metaphor. It was memory, encoded, enchanted, and waiting to speak. Chapter 1. The Word in the Grain. Dr. Vera Ashcombe had seen many strange things in her time: ritual remnants, cryptic carvings, haunted hearthstones. But the woods at Larkfold unnerved her in a way she couldn't articulate. The trees were too quiet. She had been called in by a local conservation officer who claimed a carving in an old felled stump kept returning, no matter how many times it was sanded down, burned, or cut away. The knotwork had first appeared 6 weeks ago. Since then, anyone who spent too long in the clearing complained of headaches, nosebleeds, or waking dreams. The carving was unmistakably Celtic, though not any standard form Vera recognised. It twisted inward in a spiral of braids, thorns, and small etched shapes, like letters trying to form but never quite committing. She crouched in front of the stump, letting her fingers trace the curve of the grain. It was warm, like breath against skin. "Do you see it?" asked the conservation officer, a woman named Lilla. She stood a good distance back. "I see something forming." The wood shivered beneath Vera's palm, and then, just for a moment, the knots shifted. They spelled her initials. "VA," she jerked her hand back. "That wasn't there before," Lila said. "I believe you." Later that night, Vera sat alone in the inn's upstairs room, the carved rubbing tucked in her journal. She had traced it without thinking, an instinct. Now, under the flickering lamplight, the rubbings looked different. The shapes were rearranging, twisting. A phrase had formed. "Say me aloud." Her breath caught. Her mouth dried. She did not speak, but the walls began to creak. The woods outside whispered her name, and the knots began to spread. Chapter 2. The Archive and the Black Roots. Vera didn't sleep. She paced the narrow room until sunrise, every creak of floorboards sounding like language. When the innkeeper knocked to ask if she wanted breakfast, she nearly screamed. Back at morning shade, she went straight to the restricted wing of the folklore archive. The archive's scent, dust, rose oil, old paper, calmed her, if only briefly. She searched for anything on recursive symbols, knotwork enchantments, or carvings that shifted form. Most entries were vague, poetic. But then she found a reference in an 1894 private journal belonging to a Professor Edwin Gray. The knotword came again in the grove. It seeks voice. It speaks in bark and blood. There was no record of Gray's death, only a final note. If you see the knots shape your name, do not answer. Back in Larkfold, Vera returned to the stump, this time alone. The air had changed. It smelled damp and faintly metallic. A circle of mushrooms had grown overnight around the carving. She pressed a fresh sheet of paper to the stump and traced the latest pattern. This time the glyphs formed a shape she'd seen once before, in the dream of the mirror tree. Lila arrived a moment later, pale and winded. "I wasn't going to come back," she said. "But I dreamed you said my name in the trees." "You heard it too?" "Not heard. Felt. Like it was growing inside me." Vera showed her the tracing. Lila blanched. "It's changed again. There's something new growing near the base of that tree." They walked together to the clearing's edge. And there, beneath the roots of an ancient oak, a network of blackened roots had burst through the earth. On each root, tiny knotwork symbols shimmered, and Vera recognized the topmost one, a glyph from a binding spell she'd read in a Welsh grimoire. a symbol used to keep voices silent or locked. They're not just speaking, Vera whispered. Chapter 3. The Names in the Wood. The next day dawned too bright. Back in Larkfold, Vera returned to the stump, this time alone. The air had changed. It smelled damp and faintly metallic. A circle of mushrooms had grown overnight around the carving. Vera hadn't slept. The dream had come again, the one where the tree wore her face. This time it had opened its mouth, and something was inside. She pressed a fresh sheet of paper to the stump and traced the latest pattern. This time the glyphs formed a shape she'd seen once before, in the dream of the mirror tree. She arrived at the clearing to find Leela, already there, staring at the black-rooted oak. More carvings had appeared overnight, etched not just into bark, but into the exposed roots themselves. The ground steamed faintly, and the glyphs shimmered like heat ripples. "What does it want?" Lila whispered, voice dry. "It feels like a question with too many mouths." "Attention," Vera murmured, "and a voice, maybe yours." She traced one of the symbols gently. The wood didn't resist. Instead, it pulsed beneath her fingertip like a heartbeat. A thin streak of sap, red-tinged, welled up from the groove. One of the knots shifted as she touched it. It shaped itself into a name. Lila Bray. Lila's breath caught in her throat. "You didn't carve that?" Vera asked. "If I did," Lila said slowly, "I carved it in my sleep, with a dream instead of a knife." They stepped back. Vera reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle of herbs. Protection blend, blessed 3 times, wrapped in yew bark. She placed it gently at the base of the stump. "It's not a story," Vera said. "It's a wound speaking its own name, and it's asking if we'll stitch it closed or bleed with it." That night, Vera stayed in the clearing past dusk. She lit a candle and opened her journal, copying the carvings again. As the sky darkened, she felt it, something watching, not just from the trees, from beneath. A wind stirred, her candle flickered, and in the silence that followed, a rustling rose, a language half-spoken. She looked down. The roots had split. A small shape was pushing through the soil, round, ridged and smooth. An eyeball. It blinked. Vera scrambled back, nearly knocking over the candle. She did not scream. She didn't have time. The roots pulsed again, then closed, hiding the thing beneath. She didn't speak as she left the clearing, but in her notebook, one sentence had appeared where there had been only blank space. "It saw you. Now you must see what it remembers." Chapter 4. The Story That Wants to Be Said. Vera didn't leave the clearing for 3 days. Lila brought her food, though she rarely ate. She sat by the stump, glyphs pressed into wax, dreams scribbled into the margins of her notebook. The roots no longer whispered. They waited. Each night, the same dream. Her name echoing through hollow wood, and then a second voice, older, deeper, responding in language she couldn't understand but somehow knew. She realized it wasn't just a story forming, it was theirs. The grove, the glyphs, the roots and the knots, they were making her a part of them, recording her, writing her into the soil. On the 3rd night, she followed a trail of flickering carvings down into the roots. The blackened oak had split further, revealing a narrow tunnel beneath. The air was thick with rot and sap. She entered. The tunnel narrowed. Symbols glowed along the bark walls. Vera crawled forward, brushing against roots that pulsed like veins. Then she reached the chamber. A hollow space under the tree, lit by bioluminescent knots. At the center, a mass of root and bark in the shape of a body, faceless, mouth open as if mid-chant. Its chest was carved with her name, Ashcombe. And beneath that, a single phrase etched in dripping sap. "Say it and stay." Vera didn't speak, but the figure turned its head. Chapter 5. The Wrong Kind of Silence. She scrambled out of the roots at dawn. Lila was waiting with tea and a blanket, her eyes wide with worry. "You were gone," she said. "The stump. Something moved. I thought—" "I found it," Vera said hoarsely. "I found what it wants." She unwrapped her journal, showing Lila the sketch of the root body, the sigils, the final phrase. Lila didn't respond at first. Then she said, "It wants to be heard." Vera nodded, or remembered, or released. "What will you do?" "I think I have to speak it, but if I do, I don't think I'll come back unchanged." That night, the wind didn't blow. The woods were too quiet, not expectant, alert. Vera sat beside the stump, candle flickering low. In the silence, a new glyph appeared, scorched into the bark just beneath her fingertips. A choice: silence, binding, unravel. She traced them one by one. The stump pulsed. The forest leaned in, and she understood. She would have to choose what kind of story this would become. Not just for the Knotword, but for herself. Chapter 6. The Speak Binding. The clearing was ready. The Knotword had spread across every tree, every root, even the underside of Vera's boots. It pulsed like a living nervous system. No wind blew, no birds sang. The forest was holding its breath. Vera stood in the center, facing the stump where the stone glyph rested. The options were clear: silence, binding, unravel. She had traced the glyphs into wax, chosen her ink, prepared a circle of ash and salt. Her voice trembled as she stepped inside. She closed her eyes. And she chose binding. She didn't know why. Not exactly. Maybe because she feared what would happen if the Knotword spread further. Or maybe because she saw too much of herself in the way it hungered to be heard. She lifted the glyph. It flared white-hot. And the Knotword responded. The carvings surged, symbols realigned, roots writhed, and from the earth rose something like a shape. Not human, not animal, but narrative. It shimmered in symbols. It whispered her name through dozens of mouths. She raised her voice and read the final sigil aloud. The shape paused, then it knelt. The trees groaned. The glade exhaled. The carvings burned black, then sank back into the bark like ink drawn into paper. The glade went still. Lila stood at the edge of the trees, barefoot, dazed. Her eyes were different, older, wiser, but hers. "You didn't finish it," she said softly. "No," Vera replied. "I bound it. For now." "Will it stay?" Vera looked at the glyph still burned into her palm. "No," she said, "but it will wait." Later, as she drove away from Larkfold, she passed a grove of young saplings. One bore a faint spiral at its base, and Vera knew the Knotword hadn't ended. It had simply learned patience. If this tale tangled your thoughts in the best possible way, go ahead, like, subscribe, and let the algorithm know you're hexed. There's more folklore, mystery, and modern